Rev up your engines!
Chris Collins said, I'm thinking of changing auto brands. I've driven Ford Escape since '07. I've never had an issue until my 2020, which has been a nightmare. What do you think of the 2021 Toyota Highlander? It seems like the V6 is a smart option. I read all about Kia and Kia Sorentos, and the other one I'm thinking about is 2021 Lincoln Nautilus. Stick to the Highlander. Let me tell you, Ford used to make pretty good vehicles decades ago. They're okay, but they're nothing compared to a Toyota, especially a Toyota Highlander. You seem to buy a lot of cars. You said you've driven Escape since '07 and your 2020 has been a nightmare. That's only a year old. Don't buy another one. You get a plain Jane Toyota Highlander. Don't get a hybrid. I had a customer bought a hybrid. That was a mistake. The hybrid part broke in the back when it had 150,000 miles, and he ended up getting rid of it. He didn't want to spend a fortune fixing it. You get a plain Jane normal one with a V6 gasoline engine. That thing can last 400,000 or 500,000 miles. You will not have the problems that you will with American-built cars. And the Korean cars, they don't hold up over time either. They can be okay cheap cars to start out with, but as they age, I see them falling apart. And then people get mad and said, I wish I wouldn't have bought that Kia and I would have got a Toyota. Sure, I'd pay a little more for the Toyota, but it's a much better vehicle. San Steven said in Alaska, I have a 2011 Chevy Malibu that stalled twice in September. I drive and it goes in limp hold mode. We've replaced the spark plugs. What car do you suggest for one to commute weekdays, at least 80 miles round trip per day in Alaska? Yeah, get rid of that Malibu. They're piles of junk anyways. I mean, it lasted 10 years. You're lucky it didn't blow up. If you go out and get a plain old Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic, you would be so happy. Those things, if you're commuting 80 miles a day, highway mileage is equivalent to 10% city mileage. I've seen people with Civics and Corollas that had well over 500,000 miles driving like that with no problems whatsoever. Get rid of that Malibu. It's going to become an endless money pit already. They're just junky cars anyways. And get yourself a Corolla or a Civic and you'll be happy. You can drive it for decades and decades and decades. Now with hybrid cars and electric cars, what's going to happen with all the old batteries? Where kids used to throw them in the garbage and people say, oh, it's mercury pollution because of the batteries and they want to recycle them. Well, of course, they're working on recycling. Volkswagen has a pilot program in Germany, in Salzgitter, Germany, where they're going to be recycling them, and they claim that they can get 95% of the stuff recycled. Now, the way they normally do stuff now is they melt it down in a furnace. And the best they can do is to recycle 60% of the materials. Of course, do it in a furnace that gets hot, that uses energy, that pollutes. But their new system that Volkswagen's working on, they claim that they can get 95% of the battery pack's material to be reused. So then they don't have to start all over again and dig up all the lithium and everything and all that pollution. They can reuse what they have. Now, it only makes sense. I mean, lead acid batteries, when I was a kid, nobody cared about it one way or another. Lead was cheap, and half the time people just throw them away. And of course, now for decades and decades, they've been recycling. I think like 96% of the batteries in the United States that are lead acid batteries are eventually recycled for the lead. They get lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, all kinds of precious metals that they're going to reuse. Like I said, Volkswagen says they're going to get 95% of them out. Plus, they're also talking about, what do you really want in an electric car? Do you really need a big giant battery that costs a fortune, that weighs a lot, and you have to have 240 miles of range? Let's say you live in a city. You can get a small battery, maybe it's only got 70 miles of range. Well, if you're just going in the city back and forth, you charge it up at night. Doesn't take that long to charge the smaller batteries. They're not big like the other ones, so some of them will recharge in 2 or 3 hours, just plugging it in at your house. They're looking at all the different aspects of it. Like I say, it's going to be a long way before they're mainstream anyway. And eventually, if they are, of course, they'll be recycling stuff up the wazoo. The more things are recycled, the more mass is involved, the cheaper it's going to get too, just like everything else. When it's mass produced, they have things set up, they'll be more efficient, then they'll have a whole pipeline of, where's the old battery, send it to Joe takes it over there, then they recycle it. It won't be as bad as it is today. I know what Toyota did with a bunch of their old Prius batteries was they donated to the U.S. Park Service, because even though they won't run the car, they still got tons of power. And they were putting them in like ranger stations in the middle of nowhere, having solar panels to help recharge them, and they can still run lights and stuff like that for quite some time. Computers, anything that's light use, they can still be used for quite some time. Sure, maybe they can't put out 400 volts, but they can put out 12 volts for ages and ages and ages. So they were recycling them by not taking them apart, but giving them to the Park Service and letting them use them as storage batteries in their towers. Well, the new Ford Bronco's coming out, and guess what? They're having problems with overheating. They've had them in races and stuff, and it turns out that part of the transmission overheats, puts a warning light, and puts it into a limp home mode. They're racing around. They're supposed to be made for off-road. This is a 2021 Ford Bronco Sport. The light comes on, and then it says four-wheel drive temporarily disabled. And then when you look up the code, it says the four-wheel drive system temporarily turns off to protect itself from overheating. What's happening is the transmission's overheating for too much strain. The power transfer unit for the four-wheel drive overheats. Now, Ford originally said, well, that's because that's not the fancy one. That's the plain one, and it doesn't have a liquid-cooled transfer box. They say the Badlands model does have a liquid-cooled one. But guess what? Another guy was driving the Badlands one. It's the same thing. It overheated and put that warning system out. I quote the man who was driving it. Unfortunately, after 15 minutes of hooning around in the sand, my Bronco Sport overheats and goes into limp home mode. I might expect it if it's really high, but it's only 82 degrees outside. Obviously, they have not built these things correctly. They're calling them off-roads. The guy's off-road, it's 82 degrees, and in 15 minutes, it says that the transfer case module is overheating, and Ford said, well, the original one, because it's the cheaper one, it's not the liquid-cooled one. Well, guess what? The liquid-cooled one overheated too and turned itself off. So, obviously, they are not designing these things correctly, which doesn't surprise me at all. They start building a new vehicle, you know they're going to have problems. And you must realize that these Broncos are built in Sonoma, Mexico. They're Mexican built. Everybody knows there's problems with Mexican quality. GM had problem with the rear ends on their trucks going out because they weren't building them correctly in Mexico. They're putting their whole Bronco thing down in Mexico, and everybody knows why. Because it's cheaper to build them there. That's the only reason they're doing it. If you're building a supposedly off-road vehicle, would you build it in a place where you can build them cheaper or a place where they're built better? That's all I have to say. Quality comes from who's building them, where they're being put together. Mexico, not a place known for high quality, and already they're having problems. Some of this has to be engineering because they're over at 15 minutes of driving off-road and they're overheating and they're turning themselves off and saying, oh, it's saving it from destroying the assembly because it's overheating. They should have tested these things out better and designed them better before they're going to start selling them to the public. Especially something that's bragging that it's off-road and they go off-road and it overheats. Somebody messed up on this one. Mr. Bob says, Scotty, what do you think about Foxwell scan tools? The name reminds me too much of the Grabwell washing machine Mr. Haney sold to Ziffels. He's got a picture of it and it says Grabwell washer. Now, Foxwell claims they're universal, but you have to pay separately for software to work on specific brands. I'm looking at one that costs about $150. They're decent scan tools, and if you want specialty things and you pay for it for your own car, it's not a bad deal. You get an awful lot of information, and since you're not a mechanic like me, you don't need it for 500 different cars, only one model. They're not bad. Personally, though, I find the Innova scan tools, INNOVA, to be a higher quality for the money. They make scanners anywhere from like $90 to $550, and I've got every single one of these Innovas. And for the money, they're all excellent deals. They even have ones that are $150 that are killer too, and they're better than the Foxwell for that kind of money. PJ Will Dexter says, I got a 2009 Prius that has a loudest clacking sound, but the engine doesn't shake. When it's idling, it makes a loud noise, and it goes away when it warms up. And you only have 68,000 miles. That's not very many miles. First thing I'd do is make sure you're using the correct oil and everything. The other thing I would do, when it's making that noise, make a video of it. Put it on YouTube, then send the URL to YouTube to the ScottyKilmer.com website where I answer the questions, and then I can look at the YouTube video. I only watch YouTube videos because don't ever send me videos with a link because there's too many viruses out there. I don't mess with that, but YouTube is totally safe. So you ever want, just make a video, stick it on YouTube, post it on ScottyKilmer.com. I'll listen to it, and then I can tell you what I think. Now, you want to pray that it's not rod knock. Now, if you don't change your oil enough, you will wear the engine out, and that's a hybrid car, but it's got a gasoline engine and an electric motor. You still have to treat it like a regular car. And I don't care what they say, I would still change the oil every 5,000 to 7,000 miles. I would not change it 10,000, 15,000 miles. I would still change it 5,000 to 7,000 with full synthetic oil and see what's happening. Make a video, I'll listen to it and I'll tell you. You want to pray it's not a when you rev it up cold, because that's rods knocking. It means your engine needs rebuilding. Uncle Owen says, hey, Scotty, sprays, gel foams. We've seen them all. And they make our tires look wet and pretty, but do they do really protect anything? Or am I burning up my cash? They don't really protect anything. I mean, come on. It's just shiny and it looks good. And I made the mistake at one time of acting like an idiot, and I did it on my motorcycle tires. Oh, look how shiny they are. Well, if you know anything about motorcycles, they can lean quite a bit. And when you lean bit, you get on the outside of the tread. Well, guess what? I got some of that shiny stuff because the treads go all the way around on a motorcycle tire. And I slid and almost killed myself on it. So Not a smart move. You want tires, just clean them. That serves absolutely no purpose other than it looks cool. If rubber is there, it's going to degrade. Ultraviolet rays of the sun degrade it, and eventually your tires start to crack. And when they crack, you see they're cracking, they're dangerous, replace them. They dry rot. Tires are only good for a certain amount of years. Normally 6 or 7 years is the max that's really safe. After that, they get cracked and they're dangerous. And putting that stuff on it looks good, but it really doesn't do anything. And if you do it on a vehicle or a motorcycle that has really wide tread that goes around for cornering hard, you're going to be sliding through the corners because the stuff's too slippery to contact the road. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.